Hello and welcome to the Africa Briefing Podcast, the space where Africa speaks boldly, without filters, without apologies. I'm Jon Offei-Ansah, and today we are tackling something that should have been left behind in the last century, but stubbornly clings on like a bad smell. How the UK and US still see Africa and why it's doing real harm. Let me ask you this. In 2025, when Africa leads the world in mobile money penetration, boasts some of the youngest tech entrepreneurs on the planet, and is home to cities bursting with arts, fashion, and innovation, why do so many people in London or Los Angeles still picture starving children, dusty planes, and a lion lounging in the shade? That's not a rhetorical question, because a new landmark study has just exposed exactly how skewed and outdated these perceptions are. The report, titled Stereotypes about Africa in Britain and the United States, was commissioned by Africa No Filter in collaboration with Dr. Adam Hahn of the University of Bath in England, alongside researchers from the US and Germany. And the results are, let's be honest, infuriating. The study surveyed more than 1,100 participants in the UK and the US. They were asked a simple question. What are the first three things that come to mind when you think of Africa? And the most common answers: wildlife, heat, danger. A whopping 57.9% referenced nature, animals, wilderness, vast plains. Not one mention of Lagos traffic. Not a whisper of Kigali's fiber optic smart city infrastructure. Not even a nod to Afrobeats. Meanwhile, when asked about Europe, the top associations were modern, prosperous, safe. It's the old colonial playbook dusted off and still in use. Europe as the center of civilization and Africa as the jungle. A museum of misery. A continent without context. And here's where this stops being an academic exercise and becomes a political and economic one. Because those perceptions don't just live in someone's head. They shape global policy, consumer behavior, and investment decisions. If you think of Africa as a place of instability and suffering, you are unlikely to buy African fashion, invest in African startups, or pay attention to African thought leadership. You will fund safaris and poverty porn, but not fintech and digital sovereignty. Dr. Hahn puts it succinctly, and I quote, Africa still exists as an abstract concept for many, defined more by animals and hardship than by people, progress, or potential. Unquote. But this isn't just about what people think. The study reveals how these biases directly reduce interest in African products, cultures, and partnerships. Participants were far more willing to engage with Europe than Africa, because Africa is, in their minds, dangerous and dysfunctional. Now, here's the twist. Correcting those false assumptions with facts wasn't enough to change minds. What worked? Telling better stories. Stories that present the truth of Africa in all its complexity, creativity, and contradiction. That's right. It's not enough to shout, "We are not poor," or "We have cities." People need to see and hear stories that reflect the real Africa, where Rwanda has outlawed plastic bags, but France hasn't. where Ghanaian developers are building blockchain apps for farmers, where African filmmakers are winning international awards for stories not set in war zones. As Moki Makura, Executive Director at Africa No Filter, rightly said, and I quote, "We now have hard data showing that the stories told about Africa and the ones left untold have real-world consequences," unquote. Let's not pretend this is harmless. It's not just ignorance. It's a form of narrative violence. When Western media platforms ignore contemporary Africa or portray it only as a place of need, they are not just misrepresenting reality. They are undermining African agency. They shape how aid flows, how business partnerships are built, and even how African voices are silenced in global spaces. This isn't just perception, it's power. We've seen this before. During the COVID-19 pandemic, African scientists developed some of the first effective surveillance tools. Few Western outlets covered it. When African tech hubs began attracting Silicon Valley level venture capital, it was barely a blip in global media. But when Ebola breaks out, or when there's a coup, suddenly we are back on the front pages, as a crisis, as a threat. So, what do? First, if you're a storyteller, creator, journalist like I am, or educator, stop defaulting to deficit narratives. Second, if you're a policymaker or investor, interrogate your assumptions. Ask yourself whether your decisions are based on facts or on inherited stereotypes. Third, if you are African, and especially if you are in the diaspora, tell your story loudly, beautifully, without apology, and even with an accent like mine. Because this continent is not waiting for validation. It is building, it is innovating, and it is rising, whether the world watches or not. Here at Africa Briefing, we'll keep telling these stories, truthfully, urgently, and without filters, because the battle for Africa's image isn't just cultural, it's economic, it's political, it's existential. And the next time someone tells you about that Africa is a dark continent, tell them, no, it's the misunderstood one, and we are done being misunderstood. This has been the Africa Briefing Podcast. I'm Jon Offei-Ansah. If you found this episode as infuriating and as necessary as I have, share it. Start a conversation. Challenge your perception. And remember, narratives shape nations. Let's start telling the truth and keep on keeping hope alive. Goodbye.